Hi, I'm John Oyston, and in 2023 I was asked to organise a hiking holiday in Switzerland for myself, my wife, and 5 friends. And so this describes the hikes that we did on the Matterhorn Glacier, at Schynigge Platte, and at Schilthorn. So it was a little bit daunting to try and organise a week's holiday hiking in Switzerland because there's so many options. However, I had one friend whose family came from the Matterhorn area and she wanted to go back there, and another friend who had been on a school trip to Interlaken and liked that area and the nearby Schilthorn Valley. So I eventually settled on these 3 hikes: the Matterhorn Glacier Trail at Zermatt, Schynigge Platte from Interlaken, and the Schilthorn from the Schilthorn Valley. So we all arrived in Zermatt by train because that's the only way you can get to Zermatt. It's a very nice, very friendly, very touristy village up in the hills. And you walk through the main street to your hotel and you get greeted by these people on the Alpenhorn. The town is dominated by the Matterhorn, the mountain you can see in the back of this picture. And so we all gathered in the restaurant at the front, and over some beer and some fondue, we decided how we were going to start our first hike. So the idea was fairly straightforward. From Zermatt, we would take the cable car up to the top of the Kleine Matterhorn, and then having taken a look at the view from there, we would go down to Trocknersteg, and from there we would do a 6.3-kilometer walk down to the next cable car station at Schwarzsee. So I thought that should be a fairly straightforward hike. Maybe with a lunch break it would take us about 2.5 hours. That isn't the way it ended up. So this is the idea from Instagram. This is the sort of view you're supposed to get of the Matterhorn reflected in a little lake up on the mountaintop. So we took the cable car up, and when we got to the top of the Matterhorn Glacier, there was no view at all. It was fogged in, the viewing station was closed, the restaurant was crowded, and all there was a few snowboarders messing around in some rather dirty snow. So that was a bit of a waste of time and money. So we headed back down to Trocknersteg, and you can just see Zermatt in the background. So the view was quite spectacular. By the time we'd had coffee and gone to the bathroom and taken some pictures, we were leaving at 12 o'clock. That didn't seem to be a problem because the last cable car went down at 5, so we had 5 hours to do maybe a 2.5-hour hike. And you can see the trail was quite nice, quite easy, quite well worn. And we got to the lake and there was absolutely no view of the Matterhorn from that point. But we kept on walking and it was quite spectacular. It was a fairly easy trail. It wasn't particularly well signposted, but you can see it's very well marked and just a gentle slope downhill. So I thought we would all do really well hiking there. After about half an hour, we stopped for lunch, and at this point, we could see that we actually had quite a decent view of at least 2/3 of the Matterhorn. By that stage, I realized time was passing and that we needed to keep a little bit of a move on to be sure we got back to the cable car in time. Because while the view was spectacular, this doesn't look like the sort of place you'd want to spend the night with no sleeping bag and no tent up at about 9,500 feet. So by this stage, it became apparent that the group was splitting up. There was one person who was fast, who had gone on ahead. There were 3 people who were doing okay, and then there was one person who was walking very slowly with her husband and my wife, and she was dragging along behind. And there was really nothing we could do to speed her up. She only had a very light backpack and didn't want to let go of that. And so we kept on walking, and people told me I was worrying too much and everything would be okay. But I was the only person with a map. I was the only person who knew where we were or how far we had to go. So that was somewhat meaningless. So eventually we got to the point where we could actually see the cable car station. And this was really frustrating because it said it was half an hour and we had over an hour. And I was convinced that all except one of the hikers would be able to make it down to the cable car station quite easily. But I gave the other person about a 50% chance. And so as I looked behind to try and work out where she was, I was thinking maybe we should make plans. We should have some people would stay behind, probably me, the slow hiker, and her husband, and the rest of the people would give us for spare food and any warm clothing they had, and they would go down and spend the night in the hotel while we shivered on the mountain. Anyway, to cut a long story short, we made it after a 5-hour hike. We got to the cable car within about 10 minutes to spare and made it down to Zermatt. So I found that whole experience really quite stressful because there was a difficult situation and there didn't seem to be anything I could do to improve things. So the next day I went for a hike by myself. I went to this little cafe and had 11s, and then found this alpine meadow with some beautiful view of the Matterhorn, and had a nice time. Next day we took the train to Interlaken. This is the hotel we stayed at. It's a little bit out of town, very historic and very traditional Swiss hotel. The plumbing wasn't the greatest, but on the other hand, as we planned our next day's hike, this was the view from the patio in the morning as we had our breakfast, and we're going off to one of the hills on the very far left of this picture. So the plan was to take the regular train from Interlaken down to Wilderswil, and then from there up to Schynigge Platte. And so this is the train you can see in the middle of the picture ascending with Lake Thun in the background. This is the view at the top of the mountain. And this being Switzerland, there was, of course, a restaurant and cafe up there and people playing the Alpenhorn. And this is the view down the Lauterbrunnen Valley where we were going to go a few days later. So we started off, a steep hike, but it was only about half an hour to get to this magnificent viewpoint. And you see from here going to the west, a view of the west part of Interlaken and Lake Thun, and in the other direction, Lake Brienz. And so we had this magnificent hike along a cliff top with these incredible views and beautiful sunny weather. And we kept on walking with views of the lake and just more incredibly spectacular views of the mountains. And the lake came into sight again. And we stopped and had a little break on this alpine meadow and admired the view. This was the view from our break stop. Eventually the path did a U-turn, and so we headed back to the cafe and tramway our way down. The next day we decided to take a day off from hiking, and we took a boat like this on Lake Thun to the town of Thun. And this is a bunch of us stopping off at one of the little villages along the way. And my wife and I actually went swimming in the river here. They partition off part of the river, and you can jump in from one of the bridges, flow down with the current, and then take a walk back to where you started. The next day we headed off down the Lauterbrunnen Valley. We took a train and then a bus and then a cable car to get up to here. This is the Pension Gimmelwald, which is where we stayed, which is a beautiful place. That's my bedroom. I had wooden shutters overlooking the main street. This is the dining room. One day when it was raining, we actually stayed in and played the piano here. This was the bar. It was a kind of nice place to hang out. And also you occasionally heard screams from above you because there was a paragliding tourist excursion that went over the top of this building. And occasionally you'd hear the tourists scream as they went by. And the next morning, as we planned our trip, this was the view. If you want a more cheaper option here, the Mountain Hostel actually is quite a nice hostel, and they do good pizza. So we're going to do a 5 cable car hike. By this stage, we got very used to the cable cars. We're going to go going up to Mürren, and then up to Trigg, and then up from there to the Schilthorn, and walk from the Schilthorn back down to Trigg, and then back to Mürren, and cable car back to Gimmelwald. So this was the first cable car. In this area, this is treated just like a bus. And so the kids who live in Gimmelwald, they take the cable car to school every morning. This is the third cable car going up to the Schilthorn. And when you get there, there's a revolving restaurant on the top. And you could imagine that this was a set for a Bond movie, because that's exactly what it is. When they were looking for a location for On Her Majesty's Secret Service, they were building the cable car up to the Schilthorn, and they were running out of money. So the two groups got together. They built this as a location for the movie. They'd actually destroyed it in the movie, and then they rebuilt it as a tourist attraction. And they really lean into the James Bond theme. If you go down to the men's washroom, it looks like every cubicle has a Bond girl in a steamy shower inside the cubicle. If you have a cappuccino, which you really should, they decorate it with the 007 logo. But we were there to hike, so this is the view from the restaurant. And this is where we started to hike down. And we're hiking down the ridge on the right and then taking a curve to the left and going to the other cable car station you can see in the left of the picture. So the first part of it was fairly exposed, but there was a nice handrail and a rope, so we felt quite safe. And the views when the weather was absolutely spectacular. This is me hanging out by the north face of the Eiger. So that black face that you can see is the infamous north face of the Eiger, which was such a challenge to climbers and where so many climbers have died. We could look down into the valley and see the other mountains. And then we started hiking down along this balcony route. You can see a lake down at the bottom there. So we detoured down to the lake. And of course, because the water was freezing cold, I had to go and paddle in it. And then from there was actually a path you could take down all the way to the village of Murin. And I thought I might do that one day, but I never got back to do it. Instead, we went to Trigg, and they have this free tourist attraction, a thrill walk, where you can walk on the edge of a cliff with either a glass bottom or in some cases just a chicken wire bottom. So that was a fun thing to do. For people who read the Rick Steves guidebooks or watch his TV show, this is one of his favorite ventures in Switzerland, with a look down over Murin and over the Lauterbrunnen Valley. My friends had to go at that stage, so I did some hikes by myself. I took the train to Kleine Schynigge and went from there to Mannlichen. And the spectacular views, but there was so much water coming off these glaciers, you could imagine that global warming was happening and you were watching the glaciers melt and recede in real time. Beautiful view along a glacial moraine. That's actually the town of Murin in the center of the photograph. And then when we got down to Mannlichen, there was this beautiful outdoor swimming pool. So I had a swim, and this must be the most spectacular swimming pool you could think of. One day I did a hike to Rottstockhout. It was not the best of weather, but it was actually quite fascinating to see the mist and the clouds on the mountains, and sometimes they cleared and sometimes you couldn't see anything. Also saw a lot of waterfalls. I think there's 79 named waterfalls in the Lauterbrunnen Valley, and they're all quite spectacular. But eventually it was time to have my last glass of Swiss cider, hang up my hat, and take the train back to Zurich, and from there to fly back to Toronto. Hope you enjoyed that. Maybe I'll see you on the trail somewhere.